All right, welcome everyone into this deep dive in conversation. This session we put in with these four incredible people who are building infrastructure in many different ways. We're just landing in because we've all just come from different sessions. Some of us have been in the somatics practice with Brandon upstairs, and then just quickly grabbed lunch, and now we're here. And some of you are eating lunch still, and that's fine. So I just want to say welcome into this space. And I'm just going to set the tone. The intention for this time is just to explore and learn more about these guys and the work they're doing. And it's going to be more of a informal discussion, conversation. Some of these guys I know quite well, others I don't yet, so I'm also as curious to understand what they're working on and the threads and the connections between what everyone's doing. But from our perspective, myself, as you know, Daniel from Civic Square, and we have been working towards building infrastructure in a particular type of way, many of which you'll have experienced the different sessions around the different threads of the work that we're doing, the different demonstrators, and the way we're positioning our infrastructure. We're building in Ladywood, Birmingham, specifically towards the climate transition and putting people at the forefront of retrofitting their homes, streets and neighbourhoods. And I guess my own practice has been in practicing this work, it's been a lot around building people's creative confidence within the context that we're in. And just we wanted to recognise that there's different ways that we all understand what we need in terms of infrastructure in our neighbourhoods. And yeah, I think this session was really about unpacking that infrastructure can look very different in different contexts. And we have four leaders, people of colour, black people who are building in different places in the country. And we want to spend some time with them now. So I'm going to invite each one of you to just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing, and then we'll get into a few questions from there. So yeah, we'll just start with you, Abdi, then, and then go across.
Okay, Bismillah. My name is Abdi Hassan. I am the founder of Coffee Afrik. We're based in Northeast London, in Hackney, Tower Hamlets and Newham. At the moment, co-creating, leading 7 hubs, 7 buildings with African indigenous practice, programming, 2 women's co-ops, which are rooted in culture and dance and healing practices, a drug rehab space, predominantly for Muslims. We're using crack and heroin. We also have a research lab which challenges local systems. Our recent research paper is at Parliament at the moment to Select Committee, and also challenging the Health Secretary and the Department of Health. We have an award-winning youth hub, which I'm proud of. It's the only black-led and founded youth hub in Tower Hamlets, officially the most engaged with. On average, about 80 young people will attend that space on a daily basis. And thanks. It's been a lot of work. A lot of toil, and a lot of campaigning work happens within the model. Lots of disruption, positive disruption. 2 years ago, we purchased some land. The young people purchased land, actually. They approached us, and we had some reserves, and they went on to a bidding system and purchased land in Devon, of all places. And we're still kind of like dreaming about how we build on that space too. And we are really fortunate to have been supported by the amazing Mariam, who's sitting out at the front, and Tudor Trust recently, and have resourced our work, which has been an incredible moment for us, and to be part of that new collective. My role is, Abdirahim literally means a servant of God, and I consider that my job is to serve the people that I live in. I haven't left the hood. I still live in Tower Hamlets. I love the estate I live on, and I speak a lot about language in my practice, and a lot about trauma and how we understand how language creates trauma, particularly from a slavery perspective, but also from a decolonial perspective.
Thank you. I was honoured to be able to meet Abdi today, but I know that he's travelled on some journeys with some of our organisations. My name's Pamela. I'm from Rootz. It's an organisation and a group that was set in grassroots settings. It was born out of the resistance and the need for access to space for black and brown people in a concrete jungle where we don't have access to space. Living in a land where 1% of the land space is owned, well, 50% of the land space is owned by 1% of the population. In a space where we have been taken away from connection to nature, connection to medicine. We at Rootz use a multi-generation, intergenerational approach to engage people with the lost knowledge that will enable them to build healthy and sustainable communities. Everything starts from soil where we work, and we enable people to provide themselves with the knowledge to be able to create their own food spaces and to understand what it means to have access to land to be able to sustain themselves and their families. We're a part of a wider organisation which is called Jubilate, which is a community wealth building organisation. So whilst we work at grassroots level, we also work at strategic levels and policy making levels, really trying to encourage community wealth building amongst communities to work together. So the journey with organisations like Civic Square, Material Cultures, to cross-pollinate and to really look at the ecosystems in which we look in directly so that we can support our neighbourhoods to grow healthily, to be able to have the knowledge, to be able to sustain themselves and to help the wider ecology of society. Whilst we know and understand that this extraction's been happening across our communities and from indigenous knowledge for many, many centuries, we are very we're strengthened by the ecology that we're creating, the networks that we're creating to be able to make systematic change.
Bars. Wow, okay. Amazing. Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of People Dem Collective. Kelly Abbott, the other one, sitting at the front there. Director and co-founder of People Dem Collective. We are a community organisation based in Margate. And I guess, how did we come about and what do we do? Well, I think a lot of us were coming together because we wanted to heal. I lived in Margate for 17 years, and I think there was always a feeling that there was a lack of space or community. And one day I was invited by Kelly to a house with other collective members, and it was there that I think we all realised that we needed a place to heal. There was a vision. We was meeting every Sunday, and we were, you know, eating, of course, sharing poetry, music, books, and in between that, sort of on the internet, what's the CIC, and trying to figure out what it is that we actually wanted to have, and it was a space, but we came together because we wanted to heal, I think, collectively. And that really has very much led our journey to where we are now. That was happening in 2019, and then you had, of course, COVID, and then the murder of George Floyd, and that really just created this momentum. And we put on a protest in Margate, because that's where we live. And I think initially we thought 200 people were going to turn up. I think that's what it said on Facebook anyway. And we had about 4,000 people turn up. And we were sort of on the seafront. We've got this big gallery called the Turner Contemporary, very much coded. It's not a place for us. But we were all now on those steps, and you could just see the sea of people in Margate, which is predominantly white. And we was kneeling there, just the sort of, and again, this happened 5 years ago yesterday, so this feels very poignant that we're here. And all you could hear was the ocean, a few seagulls. But it felt like the town made a bit of a silent pact at that moment. There was real allyship. And it was like, this is an opportunity for us to have real legacy, so that when we look back 20, 30 years' time, we can look back and be, what did Margate do? What did the UK do? What did we do to respond to that moment? And that just really set us on this mission of spatial justice and wanting to have a space that we own and creating equity for our community. And we do lots of different projects, and one of the projects that we did is we collected all of those placards, we created film, and we went in that building that we're not supposed to be in, Turner Contemporary, and we were like, we're going to put on an exhibition. And they were like, oh, okay, normally takes a year or two for us to plan. No, we're going to put an exhibition on, and it's in COVID time, so again, that's going to be really impossible. And we did, and they had over 18,000 people visit within a month. Again, demographic completely changed. Covered by the New York Times, front page, talking about how we were responding to that moment in time. So we've been on a bit of a roller coaster, but at the center of it, it's about continuing the work of our ancestors, healing, collective healing. It's not about, of course, it's important for us to heal as individuals, but it's, we've all got to be on that journey, and for us to have a space to do that in.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm just so, this is the work and this is the practice. So I'm Juliet Ken. I am co-founder of Stour Trust. We democratize access to land, buildings and spaces, and my entry point to this, I wouldn't even call it work, to existence, existence, I can't even say the word, wasn't a choice. It was about survival. So when my family came over from Uganda as refugees, we were given a place to stay in Canning Town, and it took a decade for them to get their refugee status. And in that time, having fled a civil war and being in an environment where they were one of the probably two black families, it was actually the incredible civic infrastructures that existed then, even though Newham was one of the poorest boroughs, but incredible civic infrastructures that existed then that sustained their mental health and sustained their feeling of hope. They sustained their ability to raise me and ensure that I had everything that I needed to be able to go to school each day. And growing up, seeing all those infrastructures that were there just be diminished and just be sold off or be uncared for or, extracted from just, astounded me. So part of really Stour Trust's sort of mission is to see, how do we democratize access to buildings and spaces? How do we ensure we can use land and buildings and spaces to ensure that we can get everything we need to live a life of abundance? It's very personal to me because coming from a country, even though, a country seen as, third world, like we had all of these incredible infrastructures that are there. Land was, our land tenure policy in Uganda was still communal land. Land is for everybody, and living in this country, it was really thinking, how do I exist? How do we exist in a way that allows us to embody this practice? So we went through a journey. We activated, I think at some point, 15 different buildings and spaces across East London, from empty church halls to abandoned warehouses to community centres that, people would give us keys and say, here you go, do what you need for your community. And we did that for a period of 15 years. And over time, those were taken away. Leases were not renewed. Suddenly there's a developer coming in and buying a building. And we started to resist that. And part of that resistance was using the Localism Act. We were the first organization, black-led organization, to use the Localism Act to register our building as an asset of community value in 2015. We went through all the rigmarole of understanding what policy is. I mean, I didn't understand what policy was, what planning policies are, what property law means, but we learned it, and I'm sure everyone on this table, in my panel, has gone through this process. You have to learn while you're doing. You have to have space to test, space to just try things out, and that's what we went through. And then we had the option of buying that building, but we were told, actually, all this community stuff, all this cultural stuff isn't fundable. It's not really going to be sustainable. It's like, but we've been able to sustain ourselves for 15 years. Why isn't it investable? And then we realized, as Imi said, there is a structure at play here. And that building was at that time valued at £300,000. We could have bought it. We talked to about 7 different social impact investors. No one would invest in us. That building's now worth 4.2 million, by the way. So we started a process of resistance of, what are the pathways to us as communities being able to take on assets for ourselves, to have that agency, and that took us on a 7-year journey. By that time, we'd lost all of our buildings, we had 1 left. And we went to the GLA and said, look, the planning policy says that actually every developer in London should give 15% of their assets to community use. And we realized that communities were being extracted from. We've helped design so many buildings for developers that have never come into our hands. And we spent night after night going to those meetings and having those conversations and essentially giving wealth to others. And that was just enough, like red line for us as Stour. So we went through this journey of what are we going to leave as a legacy for the next generation so they have somewhere to feel anchored and sustained and nourished by those assets. And after that 7-year journey, we found a developer. The policy at that time said that a developer can give an asset for 7 years at £12 per square foot. We resisted. We did all the shape shifting that you can imagine over that time. And I remember I was 9 months pregnant, just about to go to have a C-section, negotiating with the developer and saying, no, we're not going to accept 25 years. We're not going to accept 50 years. We're not going to accept 99 years. We've got 999 years at Peppercorn in Hackney Wick. Right? And that journey it's worth a whole day of just how we are gaslighted as black people, how we are conspired against, how we are, seen as we're not clever enough, we're not sharp enough, our business plans aren't good enough. As Amy said, we went through all of that, and I'm sure everyone has, but at some point, there is something about our ancestral mission that's in us that we know that we want to leave something, and that gives us that red line. So that's something that Stour Trust is really passionate about, that there's something about being stubborn. And I see my 3.5-year-old, that we need to be stubborn in this work, continue to be stubborn in this work. So just as to basically round off, so what we do is we work with policy makers to ensure that they can see us in our dignity, in that when they're saying that we want inclusion and diversity, what does that mean in practice? What does that mean in terms of what comes into our hands? We don't need to be given stuff. We want to have self-agency. So a lot of our work is at that level. We're also working across the UK to see how we can support others in taking ownership of their land. We're working with wealth holders to say that this work is hard, it is intensive, and we would love support to be able to work alongside of us. And finally, for me, it's also about the fact that we're working very locally. Hackney Wick is where I'm from, East London. I live 5 minutes from you. But also, this is what's happening in back home, that, we are having our land also taken away while we're here. How can we look at all these incredible models that we're creating here and shift them back into systems that we inherited post-independence? And how can we bring back our cultural values within that? So that's what we are doing. And look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for generously sharing and giving a full kind of overview of your work and what you're working towards. I think the threads between the four of you are quite clear. It's about land, space. It's about our people, and there's a quote that we have on one of our hoardings at Civic Square. It talks about infrastructure. And how it's not about the roads, the bridges, the cables. It's about who we are and what we value. And so, I think you all sort of spoke a little bit towards that. And I want to just delve a little bit deeper into, what has your journey of discovery about what infrastructure means in your communities, in your context? What's that been like for you? What sorts of things have come up, or what have you kind of held onto in terms of what you believe your infrastructure that you're building is about? I know it's quite a deep question, but does it bring up anything for you guys that you want to share? Yeah. Go on then, Pam.
So growing up in London, there was I was lucky to have a small back garden, but it was paved, so it's a concrete jungle. My mum always had an allotment. So growing up in London, the diaspora community carried their knowledge and skills with them of sowing seeds, but it was also a survival tactic, because as we know, our seeds are everywhere we go. Our indigenous and ancestral lineage would take their seeds with them to take wherever they go, even though that was an illegal act. So as we stand now, we live in a society where seeds have borders, and we're not allowed to distribute seeds, and we have multinational companies, agro-petrol companies, that are taking away the rights of our families, not just here in the UK, because we've got F1 genetically modified seeds, which are impacting on the health of our communities, impacting on the mineral and nutritional content of the food, so therefore the brains and the liberation of our communities will not allow us access to the seed vaults, to the knowledge to the ancestral trails. But everywhere I go, I see callaloo, amaranthus, amaranth. So, been to Greece, and they're like, yeah, the gods brought that to us, the Egyptians. I'm like, okay, y'all know. y'all know. Our knowledge is embedded in every system and place we go. So you can go to the Royal Horticultural Society, you can go to Kew Gardens, and you can see physically the stolen artifacts. Their seeds didn't have borders. They could export anything they wanted from any country and extract, but we're not allowed to share seeds of nutritional value. There's seeds that are found in India that hold colloidal silver that governments now want to take control of, because the nutritional grains that we have less than 8 varieties of rice grains, when there's over 800 varieties of rice grains which hold great nutritional value, which our ancestors knew and held the powers of knowledge to be able to heal thyself and heal the earth and take care of the earth. We're working in a non-reciprocal relationship with the nature that we work within, and it goes against not just the physical around us, but the physical being and the mental spirit. So trying to emancipate a society or a group of individuals when they're literally working with literally low nutritional value. Parents on low incomes, where I live in Haringey, is the 4th most socially deprived borough in London, and many people rely on social benefits to access basic foods, but they can't go to an organic farmer's market and get a food source that has not got pesticides on it. So it's another form of social control and construct. So the food systems, the housing systems, the different systems that don't allow you access if you don't have the right form are affecting not just ourselves here, but the global south. And whilst a lot of people don't think about the things that are happening to our cousins on the other side of the river, or the neighbourhood where our rubbish goes to and is dumped on people's doorsteps, the rubbish will be on our doorsteps very soon, because of the state of the agricultural systems that we live in are not regenerative. The practices of the ancestors lived in harmony with nature. We lived in a symbiotic relationship with nature. So I often refer to the mycelial network as a way that we can live in symbiosis together. So it wasn't just planting a seed. In lockdown, I learned that the lessons that my mum had taken from her village would not just sustain me, but they could sustain my village and further. But now I don't want to just give a man a fish, because I worked in the food banks and helped in my community, but I want to teach a man to fish. So what we do now is we teach seed sovereignty and food sovereignty. We teach that each person has the ability to grow what we can on our own doorsteps and share and live in abundance. A plant will give you that cycle. If we watch and replicate what we see in nature as our ancestors did, we'll be able to provide systems. But for the black community, for the black and brown communities that live especially in these marginalized spaces, like whilst we hold so much knowledge, language is taken and used against us. We're told that this is agroecology, this is permaculture, you need disqualification, and you're not speaking Latin. However, the knowledge that lies within, that I've been shown and that's been passed down generation to generation, baton to baton, is what we try and form here in Black Roots. The knowledge has not been shared, so when you lose ancestral knowledge, which can be wiped out in one generation, we lose the access to all of the key sources of sustainability and regeneration, not just for communities. I don't just talk about my community now, because whilst I focus on my community, because this is where I come from, but we're talking about global and planetary repairs. The extractive systems that we're working in are literally stripping Mother Earth bare, and whilst we may not see the physical sufferings on our doorstep at this moment in time, our brothers and sisters in many communities their land is stolen from them, they're taking their seeds, they say, oh, here, have these seeds, these are good, and then they don't produce the next year, and then they was producing food for free, and now you have to go to a multinational company to buy seeds, which actually, in order to grow, need pesticides, so then you're poisoning the land and you're poisoning your communities, and then we're getting all of these diseases. We need to everything returns to soil. It's been really beautiful to kind of work in cross collaborations and look at how we can spread this message wider. So working with material cultures who are looking at where source comes from. Soil is source. Everything starts with soil. Everything starts with health. So when we're looking at the buildings, like when the asbestos crisis come out or the thalidomide crisis come out because the governments want to give us toxic concoctions or cocktails of chemicals, we just don't, we ideally don't know. It's not that we don't know, we're not given the information because the information is clear in the research papers that they distribute. So when you have access to knowledge, knowledge is power. Knowledge is, this is ancestral knowledge, and we're trying to break borders to ensure that no matter what space we have, even if it's a garden box on a high-rise building, so we have buildings, we work in Broadwater Farm, where some people may be familiar with the riots that happened and the racial justice that happened in the 80s. That's when I was born. But the legacy lives on of the injustices, and how do we actually support systems or families to get out of this? We have to give them the tools.
Thanks, Pam. Do any of you want to respond to the question or riff off what Pam has said? I think something that's coming up for me about the lost knowledges and the connection to the land, like if we don't have that agency or that ownership over the land, then how do we retain or retrieve these knowledges? And I think you guys all have different experiences with trying to access or take back land and space for things. So, yeah, does anyone have anything you want to reflect on?
I think one of the things that really resonates about taking back space and also like where you see our community in space is the fact that often when we talk about our vision, a cultural centre in Margate, we'd often be, why Margate? Why is it in London? Why is it not in London? And so for us, you know, the landscape and the fact that we are by the ocean is as important as the building. You know, why not? For us, it's also about creating mobility, so that the infrastructure needs to be in Margate. And I think also the fact that we know that there is a history of racism, classism in many coastal towns, and there has been a sort of history of that in Margate, an old history, but it feels really important that we're able to demonstrate that we can take up space in a place that people might have a preconception of where a space for black and brown people should be. And also, not to forget, for us, is that what I love is whenever you meet somebody, often they'll tell us a story of like, oh, I remember coming to Margate. I mean, I remember I'm originally from Dalston, and I remember my adventure playground took a load of us from my estate to Margate when I was a kid. And that actually is still happening now. You still have coaches of people coming to Margate and experiencing the ocean. And we've done many projects where we've had people talk about when they first arrived to the UK and they were seeking out, you know, some of them went to Brighton and was a bit, not dealing with the pebbles, and came over to Margate and experienced the sand. And it became this place where they would visit every year with their church or their mosque, and it became a place for them to feel a little bit like they're home. So for us, it's so important, you know, again, the programs and the things that happen inside the building are going to be super important because they're going to be about promoting joy and healing and creativity and all the things that we know that our community does so well, but it's about that infrastructure that we own, that no one can take away from us, that has for me, what's so super powerful is knowing that our vision is about, can we sustain and create a plan that allows us to have a building for 100 years? A building that we're not necessarily going to see 100 years of that building, can we create a succession within that so that I know that I don't have to, that it's not about me holding on to any sort of power or leadership within that infrastructure, it's for the people then. And what we want to be able to be part of that journey to create a space that is in Margate, that's encouraging our local community, but is encouraging beyond that, all of our community traveling to the sea, to a space that we know people have visited for hundreds of years, to a place where they could breathe And I think that to be able to create infrastructure that allows our community to do the same is, so important.
Thank you. I just wanted to, actually we can come back to it, but what you were saying just brought up loads of questions for me. Like I think Margate was probably the first place I went to the seaside, or the first documented, because there's a photo of me with my feet in the water crying as a 3-year-old. And I was just thinking, Margate, like, just as you described, loads of people going there for access to the seaside, but then you have people, obviously, who live there, and we know the tensions around tourism and all of that. Like, I'm just interested in some of what you're seeing or what you're noticing in that sort of space as well, and what that means for the infrastructure that you're creating.
I think, it definitely has changed. I mean, I've been living there for 17 years, and so my experience 17 years ago is very different to now, and I think People in Collective are part of that journey and that experience. We often get people messaging us, asking questions about Margate. Is it a safe space? I mean, I think it would be silly not to address that. Of course, there are some tensions, and a lot can happen. 5 years, we started on a journey where we were part of an initiative, the Town Deal, where we were promised a space, 1.2 million to develop a building that we had been told, this is the building that you're going to go into, development money, and 5 years, the building got purchased by Live Nation, and no building, right? And then, we rewind a couple of weeks ago, we now have a council that's reform. So I think, it's naive for us not to think that actually these cycles of change can be really short. 5 years is nothing, but a lot can change within that. And I think, we've created an infrastructure of community, and that's why it's so important. We've currently been displaced. We're about to move into a new building, but it's been very interesting to see that how important actually having space is, because it means that there is an element of security, confidence, seeing our community to be able to navigate the town, and even to be able to feel like they can come together collectively, to be in space together is super important. But I think it would be naive not to be thinking about what changes might happen in the next 2 to 3 years. I think someone mentioned yesterday about there being a very narrow window, right? And I'm aware of that. I think we felt it 5 years ago. It was like, okay, this is an opportunity. There's some momentum. Let's get to work. And we could feel and we understood that was going to narrow. But I think, yes, I don't know if that answers the question. We're aware, and that's why it's important for us to collectively get that work done. And more importantly, I think, is collectively be looking at one another across the UK, finding ways to join up, learning from each other's wins and mistakes, and I'm showing that there is unity, that this is a collective movement. Yeah.
So answering the first question, I think for us, the idea of buildings and spaces is really trying to live and embody the idea that we're all accountable for each other, and to really practice, at least culturally where we come from, this radical generosity of love and care, and also being able to hold space for different views and different thoughts, and also hold tension. And I think I'll give you an example of how that's played out for us. So in one of our buildings, which was, had affordable workspace, we had sort of 60 businesses, a cafe. We funded it through doing lots of wedding receptions, art gallery, a cafe, lots of stuff. This is the building that wasn't fundable, by the way. And we got an email from a local organization that was, probably won't mention it, but a local organization that was part of a football club. So they'd lost their building. So this was a working class white community who had also lost their building, were promised a building through the redevelopment of the Olympic Park, and didn't come about. And no one would host them because everyone thought that they are or maybe gangsters, I suppose. And so they emailed us saying, we'd love to have a space to meet. We are a 60-year-old organization, no one will host us. Can we come and have a look at your building? And I was like, yeah, sure, come along. And I don't think they were expecting to see a very Black-led, queer-led community group. So they came into the space and said, we're looking for the director. I'm like, well, I'm the director. Like, so you can imagine that tension, right? And we took them through it. We always give everyone a tour. So we gave them a tour of all of the space, of the art gallery, like, what's all this going on? And in the end, they were like, wow, we're not sure. It's like, well, it's up to you. Where else are you going to go, right? So in the end, they agreed to accept the space, and we're meeting at our venue because, it's our space every Saturday. And it was interesting what happened during that process over that year, in that, starting to understand, where we connected, where we didn't, really being respectful to our team, and also finding alignment where there were. And I think it was really important for us to go through that process. And then sort of fast forward to a year later, we had a volunteer that unfortunately got very sick. He was here to record an album. He's sort of half American, half Ivory Coaster. But his visa had run out the day he fell ill. So he was very ill in hospital, and he had no family in the UK. And actually the NHS said, we can't treat him because he's not legal in the country. So our community rallied around to support him, and we then became the body that was advocating for him to get the care that he needed. And at some point we found in a clause in the NHS sort of, clause of treatment that if an individual's in hospital but has accountability within their community that's willing to step up, then they have a duty of care to treat. So we then became that entity. And it was interesting also who turned up to sort of like lobby and support. And it was actually, the fans who were there every day and pushing all the NHS workers to make sure they did their duty. So I think there's something about holding space for difference, but also holding space for who can be your ally in the moment of need. And also this idea that I feel no one should be left behind on this journey. It's like, how can we expand ourselves, as Fazana was saying, to ensure that, we are in our dignity, we all need each other. And I think our work, when we talk about buildings and spaces, is not about sort of, this is the infrastructure that we want to take hold over, but actually what happens within it and what happens outside of it. And so that's a little bit about our work.
To me, I look at infrastructure in a way that is about claiming back space. And I said I struggled earlier with yesterday language and the language that's used, because when we talk about philanthropy, we're talking about funders and foundations who over hundreds of years have extracted from slavery. And to me, the money is ours. I look at where I live, still in the hood, and I recognize that where I live is mine. It's the communities, and it's not owned by local authorities. Of course, they run those spaces, right? But actually, it is our spaces. And I think it's really important, especially in this moment where we speak about polycrisis and crisis, that and if we really want to be honest about decolonization, that we've got to start to, I think, demand. And I think about Black and brown communities and us as leaders, that infrastructure that is local to us is something that we've got to start saying, this is mine, and I need this for the people that I serve every day. And I think some of the challenge at the moment is they have tried their best to beat us down. And those buildings which we've claimed are running, and all of us share similar experiences where people have come in and taken the building or taken the license or taken the tenancy. And I think that we have to fight back. And that time of being polite is, I think, gone. And for me, certainly, when I think about my work, I've learned to manage my tone, my language better, and to walk into spaces, thinking of Brené Brown at the moment, strong back, warm front, and to be more gentle. And I think that's worked. But also, I think I have to speak about something that is clear in the sector, which is, I think about being Black and how just being Black is a problem in the sector. And I've been in many meetings where I've mostly been the only Black person in that room and speaking about infrastructure and being looked at like I'm speaking a totally different language. and then feeling like I need to almost play and speak about reimagining futures or speaking about how to develop impact over 7 generations and thinking I don't need to be that person. That's not who I am. I have to speak about what I know to be the truth, which is that this money is ours. And I think it's really important that when we think about infrastructure, that we go into those rooms chest up and that we say, I want that space. Because what I witnessed during the pandemic was multiple people come in across Northeast London, and no disrespect, but set up mutual aid groups who lived in totally different regions, right? 5 hours away in Cornwall. And they did so well during the pandemic, but we were on our last 20,000 trying to deliver hot food to an auntie down the road, and the uncle who had no money, or the young person who literally is just stuck outside because he can't be in the home right now because he got violent because of the pandemic. And so I think for us, the next few years are crucial, that we build definitely solidarity and that we also reclaim some of this language, these ideas which are indigenous to us, but also just chest up, demand back what's ours anyway.
Yes. The time to own space and to be present and to have the confidence to be able to say that is now. I'm really happy to, again, be sitting with these strong, powerful leaders. Daniel's brought us here together because the work that Daniel's doing and Civic Square are doing in neighbourhoods on a grassroots level is not just about the people that they connect to, the mouths that they feed, the lessons that they teach, but the strategy and the structure is what is being performed. So, not performed, it's what is being, this is happening, this is real time. So within New Ballet, like, we have now created, and we have these beautiful buildings, but they're buildings in which we can breathe in. So they're made from natural materials. Whilst these replicate ancestral methods, and again, relearning and re-educating and re-remembering that actually certain methods were more sustainable than the methods that we're using now. With the increase in technology, we heard about that in the opening preliminary when we came here at first, but the increase of technology is actually making us go backwards rather than going forwards. We know that technology can be very useful, but however, when we're doing it in such a manner that we're only taking, like our mobile phones, the minerals that are used to manufacture these, and then they're just thrown away. But that's coming from an island in Jamaica. We've got bauxite. We've in many of the African countries, they're being mined and the resources are being taken. But again, if like we are based in North London, Wolves Lane Horticultural Centre, and in 2017, New Ballet acquired this space. But when this space used to be held by the council, and it was used as a nursery to distribute plants to the local parks. But as the elders stood up, because it was the need to be able to feed people, especially going into lockdown, but even prior to that, having access to space and land, to get an allotment in London or anywhere to grow food, there's up to a 100-year waiting list. So if you don't have a garden, you don't have the ability to be able to buy organic or go to health shops and do certain things, or the key knowledge, like actually the elderberry syrup, which costs £15 in a shop, there's like 100 trees of them in North London that they can easily access and are in public spaces, you know. So really creating those structural foundations that are translatable through language on all levels, rather than trying to create borders, either through finances or digital barriers or language, to really be able to create pathways. So all of the learning journeys that you've seen, like through Civic Squares movements, are creating actual physical pathways, connections and networks, and strengthening the wider collective's ability to be able to stand up in resistance and resilience for again, we work in our local regions. We understand our local needs because we listen and are a part of them. And unfortunately, from the top going down, like, again, we're working on another major project. It's called the Eatwood Green Project. So transitioning from our gardens a little bit out of the way, but we've got a train station, which is right next to a library where children and families and schools are able to access. We asked the council to test the soil. They didn't listen to the consultants and the professionals, and now 6 months later they're having to spend another 20 grand because the lead contains contaminants, and this is a waste from in a space where we're the most deprived, one of the most deprived boroughs, and this money could actually be going to restoring and regenerating families and community spaces.
right. So I think we've got a good little insight into each of you, what you're working towards, and I think what I wanted to bring it into now, and I think I'm glad you touched on like what kind of this community, this network is doing. But I just wanted to find out, like, from each of your perspectives, what is like resourcing you to continue that fight, and actually maybe particularly being at Reassemble, is there anything that you've like picked up so far over this weekend that is going to help resource you going forward? I'd like to hear from each of you one of those things, and then I'm going to open it out to the audience to ask any questions. So yeah, from Reassemble or just generally, what is like resourcing you to continue with these fights, with these, with building in your places?
I'm scared I might forget. I should have started to thank you. I remember when I met you a few years ago, and I think for me, what resources me is relationships and connection. Talking about ideas are really important, rich conversations, etc. I've got a first in LSE economics. I don't feel the need to talk about economics, but I feel the need to really connect with people through their hearts. And that's what really resources me. And so thank you for what you've created and that you're always holding us. And this has been years of bringing us into space. I appreciate you, brother. And I also feel the same about the work at the moment. Last year, for us, we got to this place where we hit a certain number, and I felt we still had a lot more work to do. And we grew from 15 to now 29 people in the team, 18 are full-time. And that takes a lot of time, energy, and resources to build. But the hope recent has been in finding someone who gets the work and someone who's resourced that work. Sorry, I'm going to do this to you again, Mariam, but I connected with Mariam at end of last year, and within a 3-month period, conversations were flowing already about how to support us. And when you have a foundation that resources you at the level that we were resourced over the past 3 years, that's the sort of person that just gets the work. And the way that we were treated, the dignity, the respect, the opening of the door, but not looking down and saying, I'd like your monitoring report in 3 months' time, or show me your outcomes or data. That power play didn't exist either. So I think for me, it's given me hope again that actually there is goodness that exists in the sector, but you've got to find the people to back you, and you've got to find those funders and foundations who understand when you speak about decolonization, that is not an offensive term. And when you say salam alaikum, then they say wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh back to you. And that to me is really important. It's about relationships at the moment and how we build on those relationships. And of course, to conclude, for me, it's all about community. I haven't left the hood. I still live in the estate and Tower Hamlets, which we both love. And I love where I'm from. I love its complexities, its traumas, its chaos. I love everything about hood life. I love the food we eat. I love our culture. I love the fact that my gym, which is a council-run gym on Bethnal Green, on a few weeks ago, last time I went to the gym, a few weeks ago, on a Friday night, I left, and on the top of the steps, I knew on that same Friday night that to the left of me, which is the west of the borough, the youth hub is running. To the right of me, the women's hub is running. And in the same space, the team are delivering harm reduction and support for people using crack and heroin on the street. There's 8 people, and that's just 3 projects. And so for me, that's what gives me hope that I am serving. It's not my work. I founded it, but that's not relevant. And I hold the power, but that's not relevant. I resource a lot, but that's not relevant. What's relevant is that in the place where I live, there is healing, and that there are at least 80 people that are no longer using drugs. There are aunties who are thriving in the 2 women's hubs. There are the young people, young black men who feel seen for the first time and have one place that is theirs, that they own, and they're leading us and holding my feet to the fire. And I think that's really important in community, and that's what I think is keeping me hopeful. It's having brothers like you and the many people that are in our ecosystems, and everyone on this panel. It's having a person who understands, in Mariam, the work, and a community that is backing you, and that's really important.
I just want to add on to that because it resonated so much in relation to You know, the work that we've been doing wasn't resourced at all for a very long time, for nearly 5 years. And both myself and Kelly went through such a journey of doing this work, turning up every day, and it just becoming unsustainable for our health. And we suffered within that. And so we went on a journey ourselves. I think in a month's time, we're going to be qualified to do reflexology and aromatherapy. Last year, we did a massage course, and that is purely down to realizing how important healing was for us, and also that it's really expensive. So, you know, we can give each other a massage every week. And but really knowing that healing has to be at the forefront of the work. We need to be able to resource that for ourselves and our community. And if we haven't gone through that process of healing, we're not going to be able to offer space. Like, we have to often check ourselves and saying, what are we doing? We're not practicing what we're saying we're trying to provide for our community. And I think for us, the first time to experience with the Tudor Trust a process that didn't hold any shame, a process that really was about being side by side in supporting us, and like literally being on those conversations on Zoom and wanting to cry because a relief, but also, wow, it can be that easy, right? It can be that easy. And that's what we need, you know. We need to be resourced to do this work. It's important. And sometimes it feels like because our community is so resourceful, right? We can do it with nothing. We're going to do it anyway. That often it means that people can just, they'll do it. It'll be fine. But it's not sustainable. People get hurt in the process. And I think it's important that this work is resourced. And I think that it is easy. It's not. It's about standing side by side, and I think that kind of links on to like what's been so profound, I think, within this experience. The first time I've ever attended CAT was doing some somatic practices, and just before we kind of rushed down here, had a bit of a burger, we did this practice of like what it means to be allied, and wow, to have people just in shape in front, by your side, behind. Powerful. And I think the more and more I'm in space with my peers, hearing about their wins, hearing about the work that you're doing, like it's amazing, so impressed. I'm getting that energy, you know, I'm getting that energy, and it supports me. It's within community that I get resourced, but also we need the cash as well, I'm not gonna lie.
Gosh, thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, thank you. And I want to just give thanks to Civic Square and many others who curate spaces like this, because I can only speak for myself that the first 15 years, I mean, it was a very, very lonely space, because this work can just pull you in, right? It's just sort of like this vortex, and when you're in it, it's whirling around, and then even within that, it's sort of like you're in a washing machine that's been put on a bungee. So you're just like, so it's just, to be pulled out of that is just so important. And also giving recognition to the fact that in a lot of conversations I've had with my peers, and in some ways it was also healing to know how much through the work it's sort of harmed our own bodies and our own health and our own relationships and our own finances and our own decisions, and just giving space for that, because I think, again, as particularly also as Black women that we know, which can tend to hold so much, and because we come sitting here and, you know, because our hair is, you know, we've kind of made ourselves look, you know, composed because we have to perform sometimes, but there's a lot that we also sit with. So having these spaces are just so important, and I think that being able to resource those healing spaces, that we can also then take those tools and take that also back to our communities while we do the broader work of systemic change and policy change. Is something about us remaining healthy that I think is important to hold on to. I think what's come up for me is the possibility of this collective work being strategized. Like, I'm really sitting with, like, it feels like after 20 years, there's this window of opportunity that is there, but also, like, I look at the next 4 years as we need to shift things. We need to be in alignment. We need to be ready, body, mind, spirit, love, collectively, and I'm ready for that, you know? So being here is like, this is a moment, and how can we take that as an opportunity so that we can be ready for what may come, but also to strategize of what we all collectively might want to achieve individually for our communities, for ourselves, and for society, and for nature. You know, this is something that's really sitting with me. I mean, when I was growing up in Uganda, for the first 10 years, you know, there was this mantra, you know, that you kind of open and close with. You say, you know, what am I going to do for myself, for my community, and for the environment? And you close with that every evening around the fire. And I feel I want to just, like, in part of my practice, kind of take that back to the work that I do, to have that accountability as well for myself. So I'll just pause there for now.
My mum grew up telling me the same thing. We plant one for us, one for our neighbour, and one for nature. So again, we're all a collective, and we really want to look into the word reassemble. We've done a lot of deconstructing, unpacking, deep diving, looking into lots of beautiful practitioners and works. And while we all come from different professions and different disciplines, we all have such beautiful and valuable skills. One of the things I really value is, whilst I've been on the ground kicking doors open for my community, there's people out there kicking doors open for me. And I've been seen, I've been valued, I've been respected, I've never been questioned about my intelligence, I've never been questioned about my words, about what I'm going to bring to the table. I was seen, and I was valued, and I was heard, and I've been able to come, and I can deliver. Having a background, it doesn't matter what qualifications I studied, all of those systems and roots haven't found me happiness. They haven't brought me whatever would be the English dream, the American dream, whatever you want to call it. I'd done it and it didn't work. It wasn't healthy, it wasn't sustaining me, it wasn't sustaining my families, and I could see cycles repeating and repeating, and the statistics becoming the same. Just because I come or I lived in a certain area, does it mean, or a demographic, that it meant that I was gonna either end up in prison or very ill or in a mental health institution. I've broken those chains, and we're here to break the chains for communities to stand together and hold hands and to create spaces that will help us all. We're not doing this for self, it's for unity, it's for community. So I thrive and I live and I do this, which gives me the fire in my belly every day. It's my auntie Reva who brings me pepper sauce. He said, I ain't seen you, girl, where you going? It's the recipes that we share together. It's the soup that we nyam. We cook good soup. We're making some concoctions up in there, medicating our people with some simos. It's that they give me the fire, because actually the people that are not helping, like in terms of lack of resources, it doesn't matter how big and bossy you might feel an organisation is, or how pretty the venue that they've brought you to, the struggles that they go through behind closed doors. Whilst like on my team, there's 2 people. We've recently got a project manager who's amazing and helps us make beautiful statistics and spreadsheets, but that don't take nothing when we're ploughing the land, and I need more growers, I need more space to be able to feed more people. However, we're leading in so many different aspects, whether it be like community assets like buildings, or giving people access to community housing schemes. What the work that needs to be done, especially with the mental and physical health and well-being aspect of it, is extremely crucial. But again, when we work together as a team, using each one of our superpowers in the disciplines which we lie in, we can reach our target audiences and help to communicate a better way of living for the wider society.
Thank you all for sharing. It's so powerful. Just hold a moment for you guys, and I want you guys also to just think of any questions that you might want to ask these lot, or do you even have things that you want to ask each other while we've got a little bit more time? I'll open up the space for this. Okay, I'll go over here to Courtney first.
Hi guys. First of all, I feel really just honoured, grateful, not only to be here, but also to hear from you all. Really inspired. So thank you for that. It was wonderful. My name's Courtney. Just for a bit of context, I work for an organisation called Rooted by Design, and we utilise design to improve the outcomes, the experiences of black people, marginalised people, vulnerable communities, and we also utilise design as a tool to change the system and to fight the fight, as it were. What I'm really interested in, which you all touched on, is the sustainability of the work that you do, right? How it can supersede sort of ourselves. You spoke about it with stepping out of your gym and knowing that things were going on that may have started with you, but it's continued beyond yourself. In the same way that making sure that the buildings that we own can last for many years, for 999 years. I'm really curious to hear your reflections or your thoughts around how that changes the way that we think about infrastructure, we think about strategies, we think about what we're leaving behind. I think, Julia, you mentioned what you had to learn, obviously, around land policy, etc., and how what's the role for us then in the work that we've had to do to be able to carry that on and to pass that bucket, not only in the assets that we provided, but also in the knowledge, in the knowledge that you provided as well, Pam, in learning how to the nutrition behind the seeds and how to plant and being one with nature and having that symbiotic relationship. So I'm interested in the strategies, the structures, the infrastructures, which we need to also think about to make sure that we are continuing and doing more around how we can ensure that the work is sustainable and goes beyond ourselves.
I think just quickly to touch on something, I think it's going back to what Abdi's saying about language. I really think language and knowledge kind of combined are really key. I think instinctively in the work that we did, and especially how we came about, we was like in activism mode, which created a pace and an urgency. And I think now where we're at is we're understanding that isn't sustainable. So understanding that pace plays a part in ensuring the sustainability of it. I think understanding those windows of opportunity where you have to take momentum, you have to grab that momentum, or you have to take that opportunity, but also play with the idea of slow communities and actually building that into your infrastructure of how you grow. That is equally as important, because I think sometimes this pace and this speed is a thing that actually helps to dismantle us as a community, where you make mistakes and you can then fall into those patterns of behavior where we're just going to do it. We can run a whole organization with just 2 people. No, we don't need any help. Scared to ask for help. And that speed allows for that to play out. So I think that for us, it's very much, now we have this opportunity to really rethink about that roadmap. We can think about that pace, and it comes back to that knowledge and language. How do we ensure that we are spreading this responsibility to our community so they understand? Sometimes you feel like you're shielding your community from some of the process. I actually feel like now that isn't helpful at all. They need to be part of that and have an understanding of what that process is. And that way it means that certain people aren't hoarding information. And it might not be because it's to do with power, but it could be coming from a place of care. But actually it's creating that opportunity for knowledge exchange, for language, for understanding the process. It feels so important. And I think that's where we are as an organization, is it's time for us to look back and see how that model, that framework didn't work for us. And how do we change that, not as individuals, but as a collective, as a community?
Thank you. I've I've probably got 2 or 3 points to add to that. One is when we talk about sort of owning or stewarding land, assets, buildings, we've had black and gold majority organizations have assets and steward assets before, and those assets in different ways were lost. And I've been sort of interrogating that, what happened. And part of what's coming out of that is that actually some of the governance structures that have existed have not actually lent organizations or communities to have the agency to actually take ownership of those assets. By that I mean, a community center's handed over to a community group in the 80s, but actually you look at the legal structures or the governance structures, or even just the fact that it's a charity, meant that at that time you couldn't probably get investment to, bring in capital and upgrade the building. Or maybe your lease agreement actually said, no, in order to upgrade your building, you need to have this particular organization with this particular skill set to come and actually, repaint your building. So I'm really interested in how can we build a system now where communities can be, or our communities or people aligned with us can start having the skills and agency to be trained to take care of those assets. And that can be, whether it's painting, whether it's bricklaying, whether it's, looking at all the skills that are needed to sustain the infrastructure now in perpetuity. And how can we build the models for that? Is that, a learning school? Is that, we've got a piece, we're negotiating a piece of land in Manchester at the moment to look at, how can we start to look at materials and, and look at sustainable ways of upgrading and sustaining buildings, as an example. And then the other point I have is around, I think, yes, Imi mentioned creating the conditions that we need now. And sometimes we need to sort of do the doing and then get the resourcing for it. Part of what we're doing at the moment for our community is, looking at how we can support people from our communities who end up in hospital and don't have access to care, because what's like going through the process. Organizationally, to do that as an organization, there's processes you need to get to, but actually we have relationships. These are our families and our uncles and our aunties, so we can go and visit them, and we can take care of them, and we can take food for them. And so we're starting that process already of retraining our young people to go into hospitals and take care of their elders and take care of their communities and take care of their aunties, and we go there as aunties and uncles, because that kind of breaks down the barrier of the layers of systems. And then, we can see if that can be resourced, but actually sort of starting with that process of proximity rather than the organizational going in and trying to do that, because that has lots of layers of barriers. So yeah, that's just sort of 2 points.
I think of things on both levels. So whilst our organisation was very a reactive response, so we actually haven't stopped moving, and since we started, so that burnout stress is real, and I'm my own worst enemy, because if somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm going to do it anyway. It's just going to happen, and I'm going to be like, yeah, I did it. What now? I need another key. Open that door. And we kick through the doors and we open them for our communities, and it is tiring. Under the social enterprise model, it's like this year, it's been really like I've been torn between my obligations to my community, because it's like, where you selling them sweet potatoes there? But I worked really hard to build a relationship of enterprise, so that actually some of the means of the money that we're getting is not just relying on funding. I don't want to be here with my pot. I know that I can sustain myself. Just give me space and resources and I can do it. But my produce is just as valuable. But working in the food industry, if you don't have the ability to buy the organic food accreditation, your food doesn't sell at the reasonable or the price that it's been cost to produce it. But developing partnership relationships with like-minded individuals who support and believe in the vision of the work that we're doing on a wider scale. So forming a contract with an organisation that collects the food, because I'm not delivering anywhere and it's too much on my body physically. I'm a parent, I'm an auntie, I've got community aunties and uncles and family members that we are a part of a collective. The family was obviously strengthened if they don't have to worry about the financial burdens. So by creating this contract and creating that platform, it's allowed some form of sustainability. To be honest, I would, if we didn't have to rely on the government fundings, I'd much rather work in movements where wealth is being redistributed because of the understanding of what the state of the situations for communities are, understanding that we're all in this together, because I don't like jumping through hoops. Whilst I respect and understand that when I came in, I was like, okay, this is very reactive. Every time we're reacting. But if we had some kind of structures, foundations, and policies that could then be handed on or shared between us. So if there's another community garden opening and we've led the way, so why would we then expect our sisters or brothers to then go and do the same work? Let's share these policies, let's work together, let's have a portal where we can access these frameworks that are nurturing of the ways of which we do things. So again, like when I'm going into schools, I don't actually just take on board the national curriculum. I provide a holistic curriculum that engages with the methods that we want to engage with, because we know that there's a lot of relearning to do. But without the foundations, like in the States, like just it was a movie and you couldn't vote unless you filled in this form, and they sent them back and back and back and back again. So again, it's understanding the policies and the processes. It takes us so long, but I don't want the next generation to have to do that. We really need to pass the baton. So when those 10 to 15 elders stood together in 2019 and decided we're creating Black Roots because we want this space to be able to pass on this knowledge, that is the legacy that lies. Our youngest member is 2, and our oldest member is in their 90s. I can't say their real age because the aunties will cuss me. But it's like that, like I used to sit on the veranda with my great-grandmothers, and they used to tell me information, and that information was generational knowledge that was passed down. Some families don't even talk to their cousins or their aunties or whatever it is that the attack on the family has created, because the destruction of the family is another purposeful intent. Benefit state is another purposeful intent, so that we don't rely on each other, we rely on a system that is feeding us poison. Like we could go on and dive deeper and deeper, because each of your industries will know that there's unfair and inequalities. So again, foundations, creating templates. Why am I filling in a form 10 times? Why do I have to rack my brain? But what if I haven't got a lawyer auntie or an accountant uncle who can help me access that form and access that information? Land tax and legacies, and like the people are crying at the moment because they're going to lose, it's not to say they're crying because they're going to lose their farms, but that land has been in your families for how many years because your families understood, or there's been laws that have been made to create sustainability for your communities. I want sustainability for my community. I want to be able to eat.
I think for me, I feel like I'm in my uncle era. And I've spent a lot of time mentoring people, a lot. And actually, I think what I have learned is, I used to work at a place before I did this work, at a place called PwC. And what I learned at that place, at a big team, over 300 people, and I was the only Black director. And what I learned is this idea of how knowledge is shared at that sort of place, and how power is negotiated. And we had, of course, high net worth clients. I was responsible for the brick market. And I learned very quickly that it's important to share knowledge. And in this work, the unclear part of me is spending a lot of time helping people within my team and in community register organizations, for example, at the moment. It's in this gentle negotiation of working with the right funders who understand how we are acting almost like an infrastructure organization to build their resources, their capacity, their fundraising strategies, their governance models, but not for them to have to go through such an archaic, brutal year process of planning applications or funding applications. And for me, it's really about the young people especially that we work with at the moment too, and how we can look at community buyback and what the incredible, I don't think you're really deeped into it properly, what you've done in Hackney Wick with your 999-year lease building, inshallah khair and Allah Mubarak, that space and what it will do. And I think it's really important that we don't see our organizations as just internal chatter. I think it's really important we get out into community and find those anchors, those leaders, and to conspire together. There are people in this room like Nikki, who's just yawned when I called her name. Nikki, I think about, and Bing, when I met at New Constellations a few years ago, we've been conspiring since, and Daniel and so many other people, Amara Spence, who's I really wanted to see, who's not here this weekend too. And I think there's something about how we share, conspire, and we plot, and that we also help particularly our young people, because that's where I think in all the work we're doing across the 29 projects, where I'm seeing the most harm, the most dysregulation, the most confusion, the most identity loss. And I think it's really incumbent on us, especially, I think of myself, especially in my uncle area as a black man, that it's really important to empower our young black men by opening the doors to our offices. We have open days, and we've recruited over 10 young people earning 20 to 19, 25 pounds an hour, way above the minimum wage. One of them is on 35 now as a leader. He's 19 years old. I think it's really important to empower our young people, especially in this climate. So I think there's something about the high-level strategy stuff, the knowledge sharing, but to just release some of our power at the founder level, the chief executive, whatever your title is, just to release it. That what we are using, in Arabic there's a word called amana. This is an amana. The gift from Maryam is an amana to the organization that I founded, but actually the gift is it's to the community. And I have to hold that gift. And I have to make sure I deliver on that gift. And I have to make sure the people around me, especially young people, are running with that gift so the work is felt 7 generations ahead.
Okay. I'm going to take one more question. I think, Indy, you have one you want to say, and then we're going to round up.
Just wanted to say it was just an absolute honor to listen to you in Power. It was just such a pleasure to listen to all of you. So firstly, just that. Second thing was just, when I was listening to all of you, one of the big things for me was that the assets you're really talking about is the relationships you've built. And our economic system values the buildings. And I think there's something really important in not becoming seduced by the economic system. The massive investments you've made prior to the buildings were actually the networks and relationships. And I suppose one of the things I was thinking, like, I've had the unfortunate problem of running buildings, was if we think that's the asset, the relationships that you build, and we know all the work that you do to do that, what are the assets of the 21st century? And what I mean by that is, like, what should we be all doing, like creating community central banks? Like, should we be building a new class of actual assets for the 21st century? Soil, putting soil trusts in. Like, that was a conversation I was trying to have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you could imagine radical assets like artwork, which inspires generations, are they the assets of the 21st century? What are the assets you would love to build? And I'd love to hear from all of you that if you had a free space to build the assets, the real assets that you feel, what would you like you all have built?
Just off the top of my head right now, for me, in this current time, I think there's something about language, like relearning our mother tongue or the tongues of our ancestors that have been lost. Because that is a window to so much wisdom and knowledge and ways of moving and ways of imagining and ways of being and healing and communicating and loving. So I think that is something that, for me personally, when you talk about the infrastructure of buildings, like, we need spaces for that, time for that, connecting within that, because that's connecting with my elders who are luckily still alive to be able to pass on that knowledge. And then a second thing that's coming to mind for me is cultural practice. Like, every Saturday, I go to Law Culture Group, which is like a dance. It's on the outside, it looks like just dancing, but actually the experience of itself is regenerative. It's about care, it's about love, it's about embodying. And I think, how do we create more spaces for us to have and learn from each other of our cultural practices that are in some way, I think for me, that's also a window to what's come before and what can be, manifested in the future. And then how do you resource that? So that's the 2 examples I have for now.
I think for us, it's already an asset on where we are, is the sea. and the beach, but often we can have a disconnect from that. And I think a lot of the work that we've been doing with a local historian around ocean being a space of a heritage site and the lost stories, ancestral stories. I think to be able to create opportunities for our community to really feel and have experience of what an asset it is, and it's for us. I know when I grew up, there was ridiculous stories about how our community doesn't like to swim, all of these ridiculous stories that try to disconnect us from the sea. And so, again, the environment where we are at, People Dem Collective in Margate, when you walk out of that station and you look out and you see that ocean and you see that beach, I can't really put it in words how it makes me feel. And to be able to create an opportunity for our community and for you to get off that station and look out and see and feel that that is that asset that belongs to you, and to know that there are ancestral stories that are within that, and that we are celebrating it and doing what we can to remember, I think it's really important. And I think the last massive asset is joy, just joy. That being able to, like, seriously, belly laughs, that is something that you can't recreate. Like, there's not, our community we got it. And when we engage with that laughter, it just makes me so happy. And there is a chorus, and there are different sounds, low, high, medium, like joy. That is something that sometimes I forget to have. But I think we have that asset within ourselves. Seriously, when we come together as a community, and when that happens, the energy that you get from that, and we all have it. And so to create spaces, opportunities for us to be able to have a chorus of laughter and joy is, important.
I want it all. No, but like when we say about it all, like housing schemes, I want community housing schemes. I believe that what you said before about everything being owned by the community, land was not an asset of one individual. It was owned and lived for and cared for and nurtured for the all, by the all. Everybody took responsibility for that. Even growing up, like we had obviously road sweepers, but people used to go outside their front doorstep and sweep their front doorsteps, and we all had a collective understanding and respect for our neighbourhoods and the environments that we lived in. You could knock on a neighbour's door, you can ask for sugar, you can ask for tea. I want space to be, so it's not just within one industry. My uncle used to be a DJ, music artist, and he used to get turned away from many places just because he wanted to perform, and people wanted to have a place to go and sing and dance or play dominoes. And as soon as the police knew that it was going to be a black venue, before you even got there, the venue was shut down. There would be no violence, there would be no crimes. We look at Notting Hill Carnival, we look at Glastonbury, there's more violence at Glastonbury than there is at Notting Hill, but we want to shut down Notting Hill because it's an agitation to the communities that live there. I want it all. I want to be free to be. But if I was to create one community asset, I would create a seed bank, just because of the state of the seeds and the soils. Without the knowledge to store the seeds, there's no point in even having soil, because, so I would like to protect our soil and our seeds, just the basic things, the way that we used to do things, living in symbiosis with nature.
That's a great question, because I think my economist is coming out. It's something I think about a lot in community. How do you speak about wealth, but assets, in a way that doesn't sound like you're extracting or that you have power? So one of the things we did last year was set up a community saving bank, and that community saving bank has been resourced by another foundation at $500,000, not just for the community saving bank, they're just to declare that. And actually the main part of that project is to devolve power back to completely one of the buildings, the Women's Hub in Hackney, and that means power of their licensed space funding. And so we're experimenting at the moment with piloting ideas around how they can use the budget to also look at what assets they can purchase, but also how to purchase. One of the things they do at the moment is they've created a crisis pool fund amongst that space, but also to the local community. It's on a very poor state. And so what happens is community will come in and the aunties will then distribute the crisis support to other people that live on the estate, and a good amount, up to 1,500 each time, depending on the need. I also think for me, the young people buying the land is huge. It's in Devon. It's somewhere that I maybe wouldn't have encouraged, but they wanted, because their dream is to help other young people in London come to the countryside to connect with the land. For me, the past few years, I definitely need your help. The past few years, an enormous asset has been a group that I love called Decolonizing Economics. Gapi and Noni, who are not here, big up. And they created this amazing collective, and we were all brought together, and so much rich resource happened in that space. We have formed friendships and family as a result of that group today, and it's still functioning, although the retreat and the program has ended. Two of the groups we ended up forming deep relationship with is a Lion, Land in Our Names, and also, of course, DE, and we're working on a project that's resourced for 3 years at the moment together. And to me, everything is about relationships. But I also think, more than anything, I think for me, everything is about love. And it's so important to cultivate love in the work, and to me, that's the most important asset. And that love appears in the way that we deliver in our programming, in our governance, in our leadership, in the way that I hold myself, and I'm held accountable through transformative justice. But I think love in a relationship. And then finally, of course, another group that we've had enormous solidarity with, Centric Lab, who are sitting at the back, and who always have supported our work, and vice versa. And one of the great recent work I witnessed happen was an asset, a toolkit around obesity justice that was co-created with community, and how I've witnessed that toolkit still being used today in the buildings. And I think that, to me, is what the work is really about. And we can speak all day about the assets around fundraising at the moment, and we've been very fortunate, alhamdulillah, at the moment, but I'm much more interested in those deep connections with people, with foundations like Mariam's, and community and partners. And that, to me, is, I think, really vital in this moment. And then finally, to me, the person that inspired me the most when I first came in was someone who really understood assets, and he was called Nipsey Hussle. He was a rapper who was killed, and he, to me, was so incredible. He was the first person that I understood you could buy the block, you can buy the hood, you can regenerate the hood, you can give back to community, and his legacy still exists today, because part of where in Los Angeles he co-created that space is still functioning, and maybe not the co-working space, but I think somebody else has purchased that. But I think, to me, that's the kind of assets that are really vital for us in the moment, and what we are all collectively building to.
I just wanted to add, that's how my grandparents got their house in this space, in this land. Everybody had to do round robin, hand, a partner. So everybody had partner, everybody chips in, and then we had our community assets, we had our community banks, because we used to save together, because we weren't allowed into certain spaces. So like literally reverting back to that. But yeah, on the land flex, land and soil, come on, seeds out.
Thank you. What time do you have to get your train? Okay, cool. So I just wanted to just acknowledge what's happened here. As Indy said, we've witnessed you guys in speaking in your power, and all of us in the room are your peers. And I just wanted to encourage, like, for the rest of the time that we're here together, I know you gotta go, Abdi, but like, make asks and offers of each other in terms of like how you're going to move forward, or if there's things you've heard that you know you can offer a little wisdom, support, advice, do talk to these guys, and vice versa as well, get to know each other a bit more with the time that we have left. I just want to open up another round of applause for this panel and this time.